And joining me today is Edward Wyckoff Williams, political analyst and contributing editor to The Root. He has written extensively about Trayvon Martin and the case against George Zimmerman, and of course my guest co-host Hillary Crosley.
Clinton.
That's what she was about to say. I was like, wow.
Are you running in 2016?
You know, I was thinking about it.
Well, we were talking a little earlier about Trayvon Martin, and Edward, as you mentioned, you have spoken extensively with Tracy,
yes.
Trayvon's father. You have
Ben Crump, and I've interviewed the mom.
And you've interviewed the mom. So we saw yesterday these very disturbing images
yes.
of Trayvon's body. We also saw that the father walked out of the courtroom. But what we have also been able to do is listen to George Zimmerman on that fateful night. And I want us to take a listen to it right now, and then we'll chat on the back end.
Mm-hmm.
This guy looks like he's up to no good, or he's on drugs or something. He's got something in his hands. I don't know what his deal is.
Okay, just let me know if he does anything, okay?
Over here.
Yeah, we got him on the way. Just let me know if this guy does anything else.
Okay. They always get away.
Okay, we have several people calling in also.
They always get away. He wasn't talking about a 17-year-old boy.
No.
He was talking about a group of people that he has characterized as other, as thugs, as don't belong.
Thank
as dangerous.
You. Yes, yes, and it's criminal. I heard the best analysis of this from a surprising source. Faith Jenkins was on MSNBC with the Rev yesterday, Reverend Al Sharpton, and she said that this is probably the best case for racial profiling, because the prosecution can show that the terms that he used were plural. He only saw one person in the dark, just one person walking. But when he called him, he said, these and these punks, he was grouping them in his mind. And so what was important for the prosecution to get the prior calls is to show that there's a string of evidence that this man had been profiling a group of people. What was that group of people? Young black males. And so on that night, it wasn't that Trayvon out of the dark attacked him. He went and followed him. There's evidence to show that that was the case, and shot and killed a child in the dark.
And we actually heard on the 911 tapes, we heard the dispatcher say,
we don't need you to do
we
that.
don't need you to follow
And that's the, not to make light of the situation, but that to me is the funniest part, when they literally say to him, we don't need you to do that. And
yes.
you hear all this wind and all this air, because clearly
and you can tell he's walking.
Anyway, yes. Following him.
And we also saw in trial testimony, we heard from a woman who was part of the Neighborhood Watch program, the director of, and she testifies that, no, we do not encourage our volunteers to approach anyone.
Yes.
I mean, it flies in the face of reason as to why he would do this, if only because he had his own personal agenda.
Yes. Right? And I mean, there's evidence to show that this is a man who wanted to be a police officer. He had failed the test. He had a criminal background. He had been arrested or cited with domestic violence against his ex-girlfriend. There was a restraining order against him on that case. There's also evidence that he was on temazepam and Adderall, which are prescription drugs with serious side effects of insomnia and aggressive behavior and hallucinations. This is not someone you want stalking children in the dark. And that's what occurred, and it had a deadly end. And I think that the more evidence that comes out, the more calls that we hear, what we are going to see is that this is someone who was seriously mentally unstable beyond his racist sensibilities, but the combination of that mental instability with racist sensibilities led to the death of someone's kid.
And it's interesting. Today, when we heard the ruling by Deborah Nelson to allow the 911 tapes, these are, or I should say non-emergency tapes,
right. Yes.
Non-emergency recordings. These were the calls that went to police dispatch in the months prior to the shooting, leading up to the shooting by Zimmerman. That admission of that evidence really does, I think, beyond a shadow of a doubt, show the state state of mind
Yes.
of where Zimmerman was coming from.
Something else was really, really key that came out yesterday, that there was no blood on Trayvon's hands and that there was no blood on the concrete. This is what one of the first responders who actually tried to resuscitate Trayvon said. And this was the evidence that I was talking to you about before, because basically the crust of George Zimmerman's story is that he was so violently attacked by this child that he had no other choice but to shoot him dead in the chest. And the fact that there's none of George Zimmerman's DNA under Trayvon's nails, no blood on his hands, and the fact that Trayvon was found face down on the ground flies in the face of this idea that he was face to face with him, fighting him.
Plus, we saw the pictures of Zimmerman's hands as well, right?
Right.
Nothing to indicate that he was fighting for
Exactly.
his life.
Yes.
I think just as a black person, I have to say, if I was George Zimmerman, I'd be under the jail right now. Like, I think the entire case is such an exercise in patience. I don't know if you guys feel that way. I know that we have to talk about the specifics and the legal ramifications of all of these pieces of evidence that are being provided, but it's just, to me, just from the outset, it's
a prima facie case.
Yeah, I'm like, what are we really talking about here?
But I think what adds insult to injury, though, is the fact that it took over a month for charges to be brought against this man.
Yes.
Yeah.
You know, when Deborah Nelson made her ruling, I made mention of it to Debbie Turner Bell, host of Arise America, and her response was, wow, he might be convicted. And what's interesting about that statement is that it speaks volumes as to what the standard has to be, right? In order for someone like a Zimmerman to be convicted. Because if
I'm so glad you said that.
How did he not get charged?
Christina, and this is why what happened in the affirmative action case, I think, is so poignant, because the justices, the white justices on the court, even though obviously Clarence Thomas is their lackey, are acting as if in these 50 years, everything's okay now.
Everything has changed.
Everything has changed.
We are so different.
And
There's
there's
a
been
black
so
man in the
much
White House.
progress. But anytime a black child, an innocent black child with Skittles in his hand, can be treated as a criminal and his murderer set free,
and then we have to talk about it.
and then we have to talk about it. We have to rally. We have to hold signs and wear hoodies and T-shirts.
Bring out LeBron and the whole
in
team.
order just to get the man to get arrested. Like, there is something deeply wrong in this country. The fault lines of racism are still cracking.
Well, thank you, Edward Wyckoff Williams. I so appreciate your insight, and I know you're going to come back to
Yes,
the show.
I am.
I just know. I'm not going to even ask.
Thank you for having me.
All right. Thank you very much. And you are watching Our Take.
Very reasonable efforts, in my opinion,